Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. One man, one ranch, a ruthless HOA trying to steal it. When a former investigator trades his badge for a hammer, he thinks he's found peace, until fake laws, midnight intrusions, and sabotage force him into a new kind of war. This time, he's fighting for what's his, and he's not backing down. It's strange how fast the world can go quiet. One day you're sitting across from corrupt brass in an interrogation room, leaking internal memos to the state attorney, and the next you're ankle-deep in horse dung on an 80-acre lot in northern Arizona, wondering if you brought enough diesel. For the generator, I'd spent 20 years as a criminal investigator, and the last 3 of those burning everything down from the inside. Whistleblowing doesn't win you friends, but it did buy me some peace. And with the department in pieces and my reputation torched, I traded my badge for a hammer and bought a broken-down ranch just past the edge of a town so new it still had wet paint on the street signs. They called it Sonora Ranch. The irony wasn't lost on me. The land I bought had been in probate for over a decade. Bordering an old defunct railway line and nestled far outside the zoning lines of any incorporated HOA, it was raw, open land, the kind you could vanish on. I had the title, the county records, water rights approved, septic and electric coming online next week. I was finally building something that couldn't be taken from me. My days started with black coffee and ended with bleeding knuckles. I cleared tumbleweed, sorted out old barbed wire fencing, and pitched a temporary trailer to sleep in while I prepped the foundation for the house. On the 3rd day, just after I'd finished unloading treated pine planks from my truck, I heard the low growl of tires on gravel behind me. I turned, expecting maybe a delivery guy. Instead, I saw a white Ford Expedition rolling onto my land like it belonged there. Bright vinyl on the side read, Sonora Ranch HOA Patrol. I stood still, arms resting on the handle of my shovel, watching as 2 men stepped out, wearing khaki uniforms that looked just official enough to fool someone's grandmother. No badges. No belts, no holsters, just clipboards, mirrored sunglasses, and smugness. One of them, a blonde guy with the jawline of a soap opera villain, started snapping pictures with his phone. The other, a wiry man with sunburnt skin and an embroidered patch reading Site Compliance, approached me like I was an intruder. Sir, we're issuing a formal warning for visible debris and unauthorized storage of construction materials, he said without introduction. He offered a laminated form that looked like it had been printed in someone's garage. You need to have these materials cleared within 72 hours or face a fine. I blinked at him. You do know this isn't part of your HOA, right? He smiled with teeth that were far too white for someone living in the desert. All properties bordering Sonora Ranch are subject to transitional buffer standards. Section 9, Subchapter D. I couldn't help myself. I laughed. You just made that up. I'm not part of Sonora Ranch. This land's private. Check the county plot lines. There's a century-old railway easement between me and your manicured sidewalks. The clipboard guy didn't blink. Instead, he took a step back and started filming me on his phone, refusing to comply and escalating. We're documenting this for the record. I stepped forward slowly, letting my boots crunch the gravel for effect. You're trespassing, and you've got 60 seconds to get off my land before I call the sheriff. The camera phone didn't flinch, but the sunburnt one took a cautious step back. There's no need for hostility, sir. We're just here to keep community standards intact. I pulled my phone from my back pocket, thumb hovering over the screen. You want to keep something intact? Try your tires. Next time you roll onto my property, you better have a warrant or a badge. They didn't wait to find out if I meant it. Without another word, they piled back into their expedition and kicked up a storm of red dust as they peeled out across my fence line like it was their own driveway. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the echo of retreating wheels, heart thudding just a bit harder than I expected, not because I was nervous, but because that wasn't the behavior of clueless HOA nerds. That was organized, too calm, too fast. This wasn't a one-time incident. They'd be back. 3 days passed without another peep from the self-declared patrol, but I knew better than to assume silence meant surrender. The desert teaches you that. Still, I used the time wisely, started trenching the water line, finalized my delivery of roof trusses, and even managed to fix the old cattle gate on the east side. Then, on the 4th morning, a thick manila envelope arrived via certified mail, hand-signed and stamped by the Sonora Ranch Legal Oversight Committee. It looked official enough to fool a nervous neighbor. Inside was a typed letter full of legalese and pompous phrasing. According to them, my parcel had been incorporated under the extended jurisdiction of Sonora Ranch HOA per amended zoning ordinance SR 231B, a sentence so fake it practically glowed in the dark. Attached was a color-printed map showing their new revised boundaries. My ranch now sat well within them, like a tumor they'd decided to biopsy. The thing about spending 2 decades in law enforcement. You know a fabricated document when you see one. Fonts too clean, no county stamps, a footer that spelled municipality wrong. My hands didn't even shake. I just exhaled through my nose and smiled. I spent the next few hours doing exactly what they hoped I wouldn't. I drove into the county seat, 60 miles east, to the office of the Land and Parcel Records Division. Walked up to a clerk I'd dealt with before, a no-nonsense woman named Alma, who remembered me from the water rights process. When I laid the fake HOA map next to the county registry, she raised an eyebrow and muttered, "These idiots again." I didn't have to say much. Alma pulled the current official cadastral layout from their files, dated and sealed. The Sonora Ranch boundary stopped exactly where I'd confirmed during purchase, 200 yards from the southern fence of my property, ending at the old BNSF railway bed. No amendments, no petitions, no filed notices of expansion, nothing. "Can I get a certified copy of all that?" I asked. Alma smirked. 2, just in case they lose the first. Back at the ranch, I laid out the certified parcel map, the HOA's fantasy version, and a fresh notepad. I documented the differences, filmed a breakdown on camera, took high-res photos, printed side-by-side comparisons. Old habits die hard, and I wasn't about to step into this unarmed. By nightfall, I'd compiled a file fat enough to make a county attorney twitch. Then I wrote a simple letter and sent it by registered mail to the HOA address listed on their envelope. To whom it may concern, my land is not part of Sonora Ranch. Never was. Never will be. Your fabricated map and false legal notice have been documented and forwarded to the county recorder, the sheriff's office, and my legal counsel. Any further attempt to claim jurisdiction over my private property will be considered an act of harassment and fraud. I signed it sincerely because sometimes old-school civility adds just the right flavor to a legal threat. Then I went outside, poured myself a bourbon, and sat on the hood of my truck as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline. I wasn't afraid. But I knew now, without a doubt, that this wasn't incompetence. It was a test. They were poking the fence line to see if I'd flinch. What they didn't know was, this fence line had a former investigator on the inside, and I'd spent my life chasing people who were smarter than them. I wasn't just going to defend this place. I was going to document every step they took toward it. The next logical step in building any fortress, especially one under siege from smiling bureaucrats in polos, is putting up walls. So the morning after mailing my cease and desist, I started staking out the perimeter for a proper boundary fence. Nothing flashy, just 5-foot steel posts and mesh reinforced with cedar rails where the land sloped uneven. Old school ranching style, functional, clean, and a hell of a lot better than the half-rotted remnants of barbed wire that had marked the property since the Truman administration. 3 days into construction, I had about 30% of the fencing up when a flatbed truck pulled onto the dirt access road, kicking up a plume of dust like a bad omen. I was mid-post, hammer in one hand, when I saw the logo, Sonora Ranch Compliance Unit. A crew of 4 men, all in matching safety vests, jumped out like they were about to repave a highway. One had a clipboard, one had bolt cutters, one had the face of a man who'd done this before. "Morning," the one with the clipboard said, like this was just another Tuesday. "We're here to address an unauthorized obstruction reported along the Sonora Ranch shared utility corridor." I wiped sweat from my eyes. "What utility corridor?" He didn't answer directly, just walked over to the new fence line and started pointing. "This portion crosses into the HOA's designated access easement. We're authorized to remove the obstruction pending review." That was when I noticed one of the workers lining up the bolt cutters on a section of new fencing I'd finished the day before. They weren't bluffing. They came to cut. "You so much as scratch that rail," I said, stepping in, "and you'll be dealing with criminal trespass, property damage, and if you're real lucky, me." The bolt cutter guy paused. Clipboard answered for him. "Sir, you can't interfere with authorized compliance operations." "I'm not interfering. I'm defending my land. The sheriff already confirmed this isn't your jurisdiction, and I've got maps, permits, and a lovely letter from the county clerk to prove it." He didn't flinch, Just turned to another guy, muttered something about documenting aggression, and pulled out a phone. Like clockwork, the lens turned toward me. I wasn't stupid enough to swing at a man holding a camera, but the impulse flickered in the back of my skull like a pilot light. Then, as if summoned by some karmic alarm, I heard the sharp crunch of tires on gravel. Sheriff's cruiser. Deputy Morales. A young guy, maybe late 20s, but competent. I'd dealt with him before during a water rights inspection dispute with a well driller. He got out slow, calm, one hand resting near his belt, not threatening, just cautious. "Everything all right here, Mr. Millen?" I nodded. They were about to start cutting down my fence. Clipboard stepped in. "Deputy, we have authorization under HOA emergency standards to clear non-compliant obstructions that block shared access points." Morales tilted his head. Mind showing me that authorization. Clipboard hesitated. "It's internal." "Then it won't do you much good here." Morales asked for IDs. Only one of them had a real driver's license. The rest had laminated HOA contractor cards that looked like they came out of a Staples copier. One of them, a lean guy with wireframe glasses, kept glancing nervously at the bolt cutters on the ground. That's when Morales spotted the problem. There, just past the broken fencing, was a smear of blood on the post. Fresh, and a thin gash across Wireframe's forearm. "What happened here?" Morales asked, squinting. Wireframe muttered something about an accident with the fence. Clipboard was already trying to talk over him. He was injured trying to assess the extent of the obstruction. Mr. Millen was aggressive. Morales raised an eyebrow at me. "Did you put hands on anyone?" "No." I told them not to cut my fence, and he ran into the wire like an idiot. "Any cameras?" I pointed up to the eave of the trailer. "2. Motion activated. You'll want the footage from the last 20 minutes. Morales nodded, radioed it in, and asked the crew to wait by their truck. When he watched the clip, his expression didn't change, but his tone did. Calm became firm. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property immediately. This is clearly private land, and you're here without proper authorization. If you want to challenge that, do it in court, not with bolt cutters." They argued, but the sheriff's cruiser won. By sundown, I had the broken section patched and a fresh warning sign hammered into the gate. "No entry. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." And just beneath that, I added, "Smile for the camera." By now, it was obvious they weren't going to stop. The fake maps, the phony patrol, the illegal fence-cutting crew, it was a textbook pattern. I'd seen the same tactics back when dirty cops tried to force witnesses into silence, escalate, confuse, corner. Only this time, instead of shaking down a scared kid behind a 7-Eleven, they were aiming at an ex-investigator with nothing left to lose and a file cabinet full of receipts. The next morning, I drove back into town with a manila folder under one arm and a flash drive in my shirt pocket. The folder had copies of the parcel records, my deed, the county zoning confirmation, and a letter I drafted at 2 in the morning. The flash drive held surveillance footage of the fence incident, including close-ups of the bolt cutters, the bleeding idiot, and the sheriff telling them to leave. I didn't go to a lawyer, not yet. I went to the local newspaper. It wasn't much of an office, just a converted gas station with a flickering neon sign that still read "Open 24 hours," even though they'd stopped printing after 6 p.m. 15 years ago. Inside, I met with a reporter named Elise, mid-30s, tough voice, no makeup, fingernails stained with ink and nicotine. I liked her immediately. "You're telling me an HOA fabricated documents to try and seize your land," she said, eyes narrowing as she flipped through the papers. "They also trespassed, damaged my fence, and filed a false police report. And I've got them on video, if you're interested in more than fluff pieces about chili cook-offs and water conservation grants." She didn't answer, just leaned back, lit a cigarette, indoors, which told me a lot, and said, "Tell me everything." We talked for 2 hours. By the time I left, she was already texting someone. The headline hit the website the next morning. "HOA claims land it doesn't own. Former investigator fights back." It wasn't Pulitzer material, but it was enough to catch fire in a small town where everyone knew someone who'd been bullied by a homeowners association. That same afternoon, I finally brought in a lawyer, Jackie Yu, former real estate litigator turned ranchland defender. She had a steel voice and a temper like a nail gun. I gave her everything I had. By the end of our first meeting, she already had a strategy mapped out on her whiteboard. "They're not stupid," she said. "They're entitled and desperate." That's worse. Within 48 hours, Jackie filed for a temporary restraining order barring any representatives of the Sonora Ranch HOA or their subcontractors, patrol agents, or board members from setting foot within 200 yards of my property. The motion included references to trespass, attempted property fraud, harassment, and a county-confirmed lack of jurisdiction. The judge didn't need much convincing. He signed it the same day. But court orders don't mean much to people who think they make the rules. 3 nights later, my perimeter alert went off at 1:40 in the morning. I checked the feed from the trail cam I'd hidden in a dead mesquite tree facing the back ridge. There they were, 3 figures moving through the brush near the ravine that cut along the east boundary. No headlights, just flashlights with red filters and a black SUV parked 200 yards away, tucked beside the remains of an old cattle chute. I didn't call the sheriff this time. Not yet. I grabbed my thermal scope and watched from the roof of my trailer as the 3 figures crept along the dry creek bed, whispering to each other and carrying a plastic case about the size of a tool chest. They didn't make it past the second marker. My motion floodlights lit up the ravine like a stage. One of them froze. The other dropped the case. The third ran like hell straight into a patch of cholla cactus and started screaming like a banshee. I stayed up there, arms crossed, just watching. 15 minutes later, they were gone, left the case behind. Inside, a pipe wrench, 2 rubber gaskets, a zip tie bundle, a bottle of industrial sealant, and a map with a bright red X over my main water line. They weren't just playing games anymore. They wanted to break things. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, I sat at my desk reviewing footage frame by frame, tagging timestamps, cataloging every angle the trail cams had picked up. At 4 in the morning, I poured myself a stale cup of coffee and began filing a formal incident report to attach to the restraining order motion. Jackie would need it for the next hearing. I knew what this was now, not just harassment, but calculated sabotage. They weren't trying to intimidate me anymore. They were trying to make the land unusable. By sunrise, I had the cameras repositioned, added 2 new ones along the ridge, and installed a fresh line of IR beams tied directly to my satellite hotspot. I rewired the entire system, so if anything tripped the sensors again, I'd get an instant push alert, and the feed would sync live to both my phone and Jackie's firm. Redundancy saves lives. Or fences. That afternoon, I drove into town and spoke to Deputy Morales again, gave him the case and map they left behind, along with a printed photo of the black SUV's license plate. He looked at the items, nodded once, and said, "I'll file it under criminal attempt to damage infrastructure and conspiracy to trespass. But don't expect immediate results. Politics get muddy fast when HOAs are involved." I nodded. "That's why I came to you first. So when this explodes, your department's already clean." He gave me a tired look that said more than any words could. He understood, and he'd seen it before. The next 48 hours passed quietly. No movement. No signs of intrusion. Maybe the cactus and floodlights had done the job. Maybe they were regrouping. Either way, I didn't let my guard down. I started sleeping in the trailer with my boots on and my rifle within reach. Not because I was paranoid, but because they'd already escalated from paper threats to tools and maps. The break came on a Thursday night. It was nearly 2 a.m. when the alarm hit, this time not just the ravine, but the back fence perimeter along the old railway embankment. Multiple triggers, simultaneously. I sat up fast, grabbed my phone, and watched as 3 figures entered frame from 2 angles. Infrared flared off reflective strips on their pants. Dumb mistake. They were carrying backpacks. One had what looked like a crowbar. Another held a bundle of tubing or cables. But what caught my attention was the third person. It was her, Karen Brooks, president of Sonora Ranch HOA, dressed in black yoga pants, black zip-up jacket, and a bright white visor like she was on her way to sabotage a charity marathon. Her posture was unmistakable, arms folded, issuing clipped instructions, pointing with 2 fingers like she owned the whole goddamn desert. They moved quickly, hugging the natural rock wall that shielded the creek from view of the county road. But what they didn't know was that I had already rerouted my alert system through the sheriff's dispatch. The moment the third beam broke, Morales' office got pinged. And this time, I had warned them in advance. If it happens again, it's not hypothetical. I stayed on the roof of my trailer, rifle slung, but untouched. No need to intervene. The law was in motion now. 15 minutes later, red and blue flashed across the sky like a lightning storm. 2 sheriff units came in silent but fast, cutting across the South Service Road and boxing them in at the base of the ridge. The intruders scattered like ants. One made it 10 feet before tripping over a coil of fence wire I hadn't cleaned up yet. Another tried to climb back over the creek and slipped, sliding into cactus again. Second time that week. Karen froze. She didn't run. Just stood there, arms raised, as the deputies closed in. Her voice carried, shrill and cracking. "This is a misunderstanding. I'm the president of the HOA. I was inspecting public right-of-way access." One of the deputies ordered her to drop her bag. She hesitated. Then a younger cop stepped in and pulled it from her shoulder. Inside, a folded blueprint marked Future Sonora Extension Phase 2, a USB drive, and a printed document titled Emergency Claim Protocol for Non-Compliant Parcels. Stamped, signed, dated 3 weeks ago. It was overkill. It was amateur hour. And it was damning as hell. I didn't go down to greet them. I stayed right where I was, eyes on the horizon, waiting for the real impact to come. The arrests were one thing, but the evidence, that was going to burn. As the deputies loaded the suspects into the cruisers, I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I reached for my phone and texted Jackie just one word: got her. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Jackie was already on it. She'd spoken to the deputies, reviewed the arrest affidavits, and secured temporary access to the confiscated evidence. Apparently, the USB drive Karen carried wasn't just a bunch of HOA nonsense. It contained draft emails between her and 2 board members discussing ways to strategically incorporate non-compliant land into the HOA zone without triggering official rezoning procedures. It was written so brazenly I had to laugh. They used phrases like soft territorial influence and reverse jurisdiction by habituation. Sounded like they'd hired a villain from a suburban Bond film. But the real bombshell was buried deeper on the drive. One PDF document, redacted poorly, was a scanned letter addressed to a local law firm that specialized in HOA litigation. It outlined a strategy to forcibly absorb adjacent parcels by filing fabricated compliance notices, overwhelming the property owner with fines, and presenting a false paper trail in court to pressure sale or arbitration. It was practically a written confession. That afternoon, Jackie filed a civil suit in county court, citing harassment, attempted fraud, unlawful trespass, and conspiracy to defraud through organized HOA abuse. We added an emergency motion to request a court-mandated search of Sonora Ranch's board records, which, if approved, could allow us to expose even more. Meanwhile, I stayed busy documenting. Every time I walked the perimeter, I found something new. A pile of trash that hadn't been there before, fresh boot prints in the red dirt. At one point, someone had jammed a plastic stake into the ground with a laminated HOA zone. No construction sign, obviously handmade, zip-tied to a tomato cage. I didn't touch it, just took photos and flagged it for evidence. These people didn't know how to stop, or they didn't believe anyone would hold them accountable. But then came the twist. 3 days later, a white pickup truck pulled into my drive. It wasn't marked, but the man who got out wore a county badge clipped to his belt and carried a folder with a familiar seal. He introduced himself as Tomas Durango, Internal Affairs Investigator for the Office of Civil Enforcement. Apparently someone, he wouldn't say who, had filed a formal complaint alleging misuse of public resources by Sonora Ranch HOA to influence county zoning and planning decisions. "I'm not here to investigate you, Mr. Millen," he said plainly. "But I do need to know how far this went." I handed him everything. Copies of maps, letters, screenshots, the USB contents, even the footage from the trail cam. He listened quietly, asked intelligent questions, took notes with surgical precision. Before he left, he gave me a card and said, "You're not the only one who's come forward." That sentence stuck with me. Not the only one. The next day, the article in the paper was updated. Sonora Ranch HOA under civil investigation. Secret plans to annex land uncovered. Elise had her hands on the public motion from Jackie's filing and quoted it liberally. The story went statewide. Suddenly, people cared. Messages poured into my inbox. Other landowners, ranchers, even ex-residents of Sonora Ranch, all sharing similar stories. Threats, fake fines, mysterious bylaws. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was a pattern. The first court hearing was set for 9 in the morning on a Friday, and by 8:30 the county courthouse was buzzing louder than a rattlesnake nest. Local press was out in force. Jackie had advised me to keep things low-key, but subtlety's tough when half the town has already read your name in bold caps on the front page of the Gazette. So I showed up in jeans, boots, and a worn flannel shirt because I didn't need to dress like a victim. I just needed to show up like someone who wasn't scared. Inside, Karen sat with her lawyer, a man who looked like he billed by the minute and hadn't seen the sun in 10 years. She didn't meet my eyes, but I could see the redness in hers. She looked tired. Not the "I didn't sleep last night" kind of tired, but the "I can see the cliff edge and no one's hitting the brakes" kind. Jackie presented our case cleanly. Unauthorized entry, repeated harassment, attempted sabotage, fabricated documents, conspiracy to defraud, and evidence of premeditated targeting. The court reviewed footage from the cameras, emails from the USB, and witness statements from 2 other landowners who had suddenly emerged with similar experiences. Then came the part that hit hardest. We revealed that the Sonora Ranch HOA patrol, that badge-wearing, clipboard-wielding little paramilitary cosplay unit, was never formally registered with the state or county. Their insurance had lapsed. Their training manuals were lifted wholesale from a PDF found on a libertarian message board. And the uniforms, bought in bulk from a warehouse supplier in Texas that also sold cosplay gear for Wild West reenactors. By the end of Jackie's presentation, the judge was visibly angry. Karen's lawyer tried to argue procedural ambiguity that the HOA had reasonably believed the land was part of its jurisdiction. But when the judge asked for proof that any zoning change had ever been recorded with the county, the attorney stammered, then fumbled, then quietly sat down. The court ruled in our favor. An emergency injunction was granted barring the HOA from further contact with me or any other neighboring landowners not explicitly recorded as members. A separate motion was entered to begin formal investigation into fraudulent boundary expansion efforts. Karen was issued a criminal summons to appear for further charges, including trespassing, document forgery, conspiracy to defraud, and destruction of private property. And then came the domino. Within 24 hours of the ruling, 3 board members resigned. Emails leaked, messages showing they'd known Karen was acting beyond her authority, but didn't intervene because they were either afraid of her or complicit in her schemes. One message even read, "Let her handle it. If it goes bad, it's her ass." The HOA's official page went offline. Their Facebook group, once moderated like a mini-cult, was flooded with angry posts and screenshots of our evidence. Homeowners within Sonora Ranch started calling emergency meetings. But the part that surprised me most came from the sheriff. Deputy Morales called me 2 days later. "You'll want to come down and sign the statement in person," he said. "We're recommending charges against Karen and 2 others. We also seized files from the HOA office. You were right, it's deeper than we thought." I went in and reviewed the documents. Not just HOA files, but bank transfers, real estate correspondences, and emails showing Karen had tried to buy off a junior planner at the zoning board. The web was tangled, but it wasn't invisible anymore. Later that week, I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching a moving van pull up 2 houses down across the old railroad line. The HOA vice president was leaving. One less wolf in the sheep's council. The last piece fell into place faster than I expected. A month after the ruling, the county prosecutor filed formal criminal charges against Karen Brooks and 2 of her closest allies on the HOA board. Fraud, conspiracy, destruction of private property, unlawful surveillance, and attempted extortion. The trial wasn't going to be a quick one, but the opening statements alone were enough to send half of Sonora Ranch into a panic. Apparently, nobody in the HOA's general membership had any idea what Karen and her little regime had been doing behind closed doors. Most of them thought the patrol was just some glorified neighborhood watch. Turns out, it was more of a personal militia with clipboards and delusions of grandeur. Public pressure mounted. Within 3 weeks, over 70% of Sonora Ranch's homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. The bylaws allowed it if 2/3 of the members voted in favor during an emergency general session, and they did. Fast. No tears, no ceremonies, just signatures and silence. Jackie called me the day after the final count was confirmed. "Well," she said, "I guess we'll have to find something else for you to fight now." I laughed harder than I had in months. In the civil suit, the court awarded $1,200,000 in damages. Between attorney's fees, property repairs, defamation, stress, and what the judge called egregious overreach of a private body, The HOA, or what remained of its financial reserves, was gutted. Karen, meanwhile, was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. Her co-conspirators got probation, community service, and a lifetime ban from serving on any homeowner's board in the state of Arizona. A few weeks later, I finally got back to what I'd come here to do in the first place. I finished clearing the pasture. The fencing was rebuilt, this time thicker, deeper, with steel posts and surveillance hidden inside the fence line itself. The water system was repaired, fortified, and upgraded with automatic shutoffs and a fail-safe tank reserve. The house foundation went in with a crew of veterans I hired through a buddy who ran a nonprofit down in Flagstaff. The barn came next, then the stable. By summer, the horses arrived, and with them came something that felt like peace. Not the kind that floats in quietly and lights candles in the background, but the kind you fight for, sweat into, and bleed across. The kind that makes you earn every goddamn sunrise. I opened the writing school that fall. Small at first, just weekend lessons, mostly kids from nearby towns, a few parents looking to escape HOA life for a couple hours a week. They rode like they were free. I didn't talk about what happened unless someone asked, and if they did, I kept it simple. It's my land, I'd say. And I kept it that way. A year later, I wrote an article for a national property owners magazine, How to Defend Your Land from HOA Overreach. It went viral. Letters poured in from all over the country. People shared their own HOA horror stories, their fights, their victories, and sometimes their losses. Some just thanked me for proving it could be done. Now, when you drive up the dirt road that leads to my property, you'll see a weathered wood sign nailed to the gate in bold black letters. Private property. No HO zone. Trespassers will be recorded and prosecuted. And just beyond the old ravine where they used to sneak in at night. That's where we built the new Sheriff's Department target range. They say the echo of a good shot carries for miles out here. I hope she can still hear it.